comes about for them, and those of us who are white, how that come about for us. So, that's given that. What we'd like to do is to introduce yourselves, just your first name, and recall one experience. Come on in, sit, have a chair here. We're just getting started. We're just introducing. Hi.
Hi.
First, let us know your children's name, they're not your name, definitely, but their ages. That might help. They might be sharing similar experiences with other people here. So your children's ages, and one experience that you remember as a child where you learned something or learned a value, and it could have been from your grandma, your aunt, it could have been a teacher, it could have been a neighbor, it could have been an older sibling. I'm one of 9, and I've got lots of siblings, so a lot of my learning happened with brothers. So think of one experience that you learned as you look back, a value, some kind of a value, kind of how that came about for you. Because that's what we're going to be talking about, is how do we learn values? And it's something that often isn't spoken about, but is lived out in the way that we interact with other people. So does anything come up for anybody who can think about that?
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
Are you thinking of a value like around identity?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No. Just a value, because we're talking about values, and I think that's a good place to start. Anybody have a memory?
I feel like I can start.
Okay, go ahead.
So my name is Jimena. As I came in, I don't have children, but I teach social justice. I am the women's studies faculty on campus. And I have lots of students who come to me and say, how do I do this with my kids?
Yeah.
And the ones who don't have that question, the other comment is, people should be teaching this to their kids without recognizing how very hard this is.
Yeah.
And so I'm coming from a different perspective, which I'm trying to get good data to share with my students. And an experience I can remember is, I kind of say that I grew up in a very non-traditional household, so things that would be forbidden in other houses were not forbidden in mine. So we could cuss, we could be messy, we weren't doing as many chores, had freedom of sexuality. But the thing that was really pushed in my house was solidarity, and it was pushed hard. So we would get into all kinds of serious trouble for mocking people or bullying people. And coming from a bicultural and bilingual family, one of the things I remember, this came up over and over, but was issues of language. And you do not mock somebody for making a mistake with language, how you do not mock somebody and humiliate them in any way. So that would get me in trouble for weeks, whereas leaving the kitchen messy was not a problem.
And was it unspoken too sometimes?
Yes, but often
But
it was spoken out,
verbalized.
like, yeah,
Like,
it was
you can't do
verbalized,
that.
yeah, and there was punishment involved, and it was one of the big sacred things in my house that you did not violate, was mocking somebody or humiliating somebody in any way. We would get talked to, nothing like that.
Very powerful value.
Mhm.
Very powerful. Thank you. Any other stories?
There's so many, I'm having a hard time pinpointing them with like a specific person. I grew up in New York City, and there was a lot of learning going on constantly. So
Outside the home.
Yeah, outside of the home, and of course with my parents also.
Yeah.
So I'm having a hard time. Like when you were speaking, like that's just what I lived. Like people didn't make fun of each other. It wasn't because everybody did speak different languages. So it wasn't. It was just part of what was going on. So I do have children. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
3 and 5.
They're in the daycare here, preschool here. But I'll think about it. If I can pinpoint
Some values.
I have a value that I can share. It wasn't expressed in an explicit way, but it was, and this was, I'm from Afghanistan, and I have 2 girls now, but even before I came here when I was 9, and I remember, must have been 5 or 6, I remember it like it was yesterday, hearing my mom's sister talk to my mom about someone who had a baby, and they were talking about how the baby was ugly because of the skin tone. Was dark. And that kind of has carried through here too, not just there, that like within, you know, in Afghanistan there's a spectrum of skin tones from white to very dark. But here too, I noticed like even within our community, large community, there's always this undertone where it's not very, you know, it's not very direct, but you pick it up and children pick it up. And you know, the fact that I remember it so vividly from such a long time ago, I made sure that I talk about those things to my children when it comes up, and so now they kind of identify it. So I'm hoping that I've broken that chain where they're aware of it, because for years I hadn't, you know, internalized that of my own skin. Because I remember when I met the baby, when I went and saw the baby's skin tone was like mine, and they were saying how the baby was ugly because of the skin tone.
Therefore, you were ugly.
Right, that's how
Yeah, that's how
that
you
was my,
perceived that.
yep, and I
Yeah.
was very young when I heard that comment.
Yes.
So I'm Ananda.
Human.
Nana's childhood was kind of the opposite of mine.
Oh, wow.
We remember one time when me and my mom and my stepfather were driving past the Pride Parade, and my stepfather was just knocking everyone. I very much remember him being like, "Look at all the freaks," which struck a chord with me because I've known that I was queer since I was a child, and obviously did not tell them. But I don't have any children. I am in the EC program, and I babysit right now. So I take care of my girls.
Those kinds of experiences really stick with us. And we live them out. That's where we talk about. This is kind of where that begins for us.
Yes, I'm Rachel, and I have two kiddos. One's 11, my daughter, and my son is almost 8. And so I don't know if this is time of day, but at first I was just wondering, why is something's wrong? But then as people started talking, it was really helping things take into gear here. And with what you were just talking about, one thing that I remember was from that I learned from my mom. And my mom is a woman who I rarely see her get angry or express anger. It's, you know, for whatever reason, it's just not part of her makeup or something she didn't feel like she could do. So I never really saw her get angry, except on a couple occasions. And one of them, I was probably first grade. It's a little fuzzy, so I don't remember exactly when. And I came home and repeated a joke that I had heard at school. And it was about another nationality. And I repeated it thinking my mom would laugh because that's what the other kids did at school. And her response, you know, my dad was someone like, oh, you know, if he's upset, you know, look out. I'd never seen my mom respond. She was, and it wasn't like she yelled or anything, but just her whole body language. I knew immediately I did something wrong, but I didn't understand what it was. And
Do you remember how old you were?
I think I was around first grade, but I remember where we were living, and that was between kindergarten and third grade. So I'm guessing it was first, second, like somewhere around there. I wouldn't think it was kindergarten, but and in her explaining why this was so wrong, she was very clear that you never, ever in our household ever make light of other people, ever make fun of other people. There's never any situation where, and for lack of a better word, you make light of, or you make fun of, or you put other people down. And she said, and by the way, Rachel, we are this nationality, part of this nationality that you just came home about. And so it was a powerful experience. And it was something, you know, as I was sifting through things that I've learned from my parents, and we all have things we're like, yeah, I keep this, so I don't know about that.
Right, that's right.
That's one of the ones that really resonated with me, and sorry, this is getting a little long-winded, because my brother, who is gay and didn't come out until he was in college, one of the things that he and I talked about appreciating so much is he never ever from my parents heard anything negative, and it was just such a gift because it wasn't necessarily something they could understand, but because of that environment and that value that they had, it was just something that wasn't going to come up, and that's not at all, our friends' experiences, brothers' experiences. So yeah, that was a really good kind of in my face at an early age.
And it's always around an experience. It was similar to what you grew up in. Yeah.
See, I remember telling, like, growing up with parents who would say things like, you don't talk about people that way, or that's not how we are, but then going to, like, my mother's side of the family. And hanging out with my aunts and uncles on her side of the family, and her falling back into those ways, and seeing this, like, being told what to do and how to be, and then seeing that it's okay in these certain instances to make certain jokes or comments about someone, or that I remember being a kid and being like confused. Yeah. So as a parent now, I'm like, my husband has that problem sometimes when he'll make a comment, and I'm like, no, not in the house, like that's not gonna happen. Let's squash that now, But because that was something I remember, not specific to that, but in general being confused by that, like flipping the switch on where you are and whether or not you can speak a certain way.
And that's that critical thinking piece that's really important. And there's some educators feel that just don't say anything, for instance, about race, that we're all the same and don't say anything. But in fact, the children are like you are. They're saying things to each other. They're confused because parents are not saying anything. And that's a myth that we have to break down, because that's what kind of fuels the fire of bias and prejudice, is ignoring it, pretending it's not there.
The environment already speaks very loud.
That's right.
To children. Not addressing it doesn't make it go away.
It's intuitive to subtext of situations.
Yeah.
I have a story that's not mine. Can I share it?
Yes, go ahead.
My favorite story is how I always start every term, every class I teach. It comes from one of my students, and she said that she was driving along in the car with her 2 3-year-olds, little bitty. And they were driving along. They passed a billboard that she didn't notice, but the image is a white woman with devil horns and a black woman with a halo. And so she didn't notice it. They were driving along, and the girl called out, "Hey, Mommy, isn't that backwards?" And she said that she didn't get it until she got it. And then when she got it, she froze. She pulled the car over and stopped and said that she couldn't even start speaking. She was just terrified, going, how did this get in her head
At 3.
at this age? And that she knew it so well that she could just call it out on the go. It was automatic, instant. It wasn't something she had to think through. And she knew it deep in her heart. And the worst part about this is that she was African American.
Yeah.
So she knew.
She did.
She knew
In
that
her
she was bad.
experiences. Yeah.
Little.
Yeah.
And this is how I start the class, because we'd like to think that this happens later on. And no, this is really young.
There's been many researches done and testing out children's, the learned messages, where they have the babies in front of them and they choose which one is the smart baby, which one is the dumb baby, and even which one is the pretty one, which one, and whether the child is white or black or anything in between, the answers are very similar. Where the messages, the societal messages that they receive, it's the darker the skin, the more negative, their opinion of it, the responses, and the fairer is the positive responses.
And that's across the nation, it's not just.
International has been going on for decades.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
They've been repeating the study over and over.
I can share a story. So I'm also bicultural, and my dad was very much of the, we're here and we married an American, and we should be American kind of mentality. And it's just funny, sometimes I even look at him even today, and there's so much about his culture that still is with him and is in our entire family. And it's just funny because there was no kind of identifying of that. But I would run into these things like in the world, and I remember the thing I remember the story was that being in elementary school and taking black beans and rice to school in my little thing for lunch, and at that time, I mean, black beans are like more popular now than they were. Like in the early '80s, no one ate them, except unless you were like from another country, I guess. But
yeah.
I mean, they're a lot more available now. But I mean, literally, the kids would be like, "Ew, what is that? It looks like poop," you know, that kind of thing, because it's so dark and stuff like that. And it was just this like, is this weird? Like, no one told me it was weird. Like, that sort of, I kept running into those things of like, oh, this Brazilian-ness keeps coming up. But it was something that he didn't want to really identify as, you know, as a part of us for a long time. So, I mean, he does and doesn't, you know, he's one of those ones that goes back and forth.
Yeah,
I can
go
share.
ahead.
I grew up in South Texas, very poor, and minority, so I got to experience the opposite. Seeing the restaurants, stores, but also a socioeconomic thing where I didn't have a very wealthy school, and so I got to go there until junior high, and then all the rich kids went off to private school. But along with, I was thinking of values, but along with that, my mother always talked about rich kids have rich kid problems, they can afford more expensive drugs, they can do different, and that the burden of richness is different. And poor folks that have a lot of skills, survival skills, and it's easier to go from poor to rich than from rich to poor. And so it really, and I didn't quite realize that difference until like later on, but it was a really awesome value because I don't have that, you know, that socioeconomic.
The social class.
Yeah, like being able
And
to
honoring.
objectively looking at it and honoring the skills of folks. Because I can fix anything in my house.